So lots of people are telling us that we live here in America, and that we live in this post-Christian world, a post-Christian world, meaning that the religious landscape is completely changing. And they tell us that here in the United States, that the church and Christianity has been on a major long-term trend of decline. The Pew Research Center started some research in 2007. They concluded their research last year, and they just released their findings back in May, so just a few months ago. And I want to highlight some of this research. And I don't want to do it to simply raise fear and anxiety. Why I want to do it is because I think it helps us better understand the world that we're living in. It helps us better understand the people that we interact with on a daily basis. So the Pew Research Center, they surveyed 35,000 Americans, and here's some of what they came up with. The percentage of adults who describe themselves as Christian has dropped by nearly 8 percentage points in 7 years, from 78 to 70%. That's from 2007 to 2014. And they say that the decline is primarily among mainline Protestants and Catholics. For instance, in 2007, there were 41 million mainline Protestants. In 2014, currently, there are 36 million mainline Protestants. Now, this is an interesting statistic here. So interesting, my mic freaks out. The number of religiously unaffiliated adults has increased by roughly 19 million people since 2007. There are approximately 56 million religiously unaffiliated adults in the U.S., and they are commonly referred to as the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-S. Raise your hand if you've heard the term the nuns, the rising group in America. Yeah, a few of you. Interesting. They outnumber mainline Protestants, they outnumber Catholics, and they are really close behind evangelical Christians in America. Now, what happens is, I'm going to back up there. What happens is, church people, we sometimes can react out of fear, and we can come up with some really fancy ideas, right? You may have heard some of these ideas, like, hey, you know what we need to do? We just need to get some more laser lights in here. And then we need to put a smoke thing over here and really create the atmosphere, because then we'll be doing something cool and people really want cool. Or you know what we need to do? We need to get a coffee shop right in the entrance of the church, because nothing's wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in fact, if we do that, we can become like the Starbucks, the third place. You remember this? Starbucks is the third place. You have home, work, and then Starbucks, and we, the church, can become the next Starbucks. Wouldn't that be cool? Okay, that one didn't work. Too many of you think that would be cool. We may have a coffee shop in here. So I was sitting among a group of church people. This was several years ago. I was in my early 20s. And this group of church people, they were talking about how their church is dying. Like every year they're losing attendance. One of the church leaders stands up, and he had this great idea. He said, you know what I think we need to do? We need to invite all the other church leaders and all the regular attenders, like the good, faithful attenders. We need to invite them to come a few minutes early on Sunday mornings. And when they come, we need to encourage them to sit in the front rows, the front pews, because if we do that and then new people walk in, there will be the perception that something interesting is happening. Seriously? Dude, like, that's not authentic. That's kind of creepy. And by the way, if you thought even this was a good idea, do you really think this would be effective? Do you really think if people are sitting in the front rows early that people are just going to start flocking through the doors? And you might remember the worship wars. You all remember the worship wars that started somewhere late 80s, 90s, where we started saying, okay, we got to figure it out. You old people like organs and hymns, and young people, they want the cooler thing. They want drums, guitars, and contemporary music, so we'll just do both because people are looking for the next cool thing, and we got to offer them both. And in my experience, in my observation, young people are not looking for the next cool thing. And here's the kicker. I don't think old people are looking for the next cool thing either. We're not looking for something that's cool. We're looking for something that's deep and meaningful and authentic. Am I right? Something deep, meaningful, and authentic. Now, the Barna Research Group, they recently came out with an article. I find it interesting. They identified the top 6 reasons why young people are leaving church. And I just want to highlight a couple of the reasons. Reason number 2, experience of Christianity is shallow. 1/3 said church is boring. 1/4 said that faith is not relevant to my career or interest. 1/5 of these young adults who attended a church as a teenager said that God seems missing from my experience of church. Seems like a problem, doesn't it, for God to be missing from the church experience? Reason number 6. The church feels unfriendly to those who doubt. Young adults with Christian experience say the church is not a place that allows them to express doubts. They do not feel safe admitting that sometimes Christianity does not make sense. In addition, many feel that the church's response to doubt is trivial. Some of the perceptions in this regard include not being able to ask my most pressing life questions in church and having significant intellectual doubts about my faith. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that, when I hear that, I don't hear a desire to be a part of the next cool thing. I hear a desire to be a part of something that's deep, not shallow, something that's meaningful, where they can ask their most pressing questions, where they can voice their significant doubts, and something that's authentic, a place where they can be real. And I say they, but I'm talking about we, us. We want those places, the deep, the meaningful, the authentic. And here's the thing. We want to do it together. We know that we can't do this alone. The questions are too big. The journey is too big. Oh, but still some people will react and respond out of fear. Oh, the church is dying. Look at the statistics. Look at the research. In 50 years, we won't be here. Christianity won't exist in America. Really? Really? Like, the truth is, institutions may at some point die because they're things, and things have a shelf life. Things die and other things come to life, or things evolve into new things. But the idea of journeying together as a group of people, this isn't a fad. It's not a dying idea. In fact, when people say, oh, the church is dying, what's going to happen? Ask yourself these questions. Do you have big questions about your life? Do you have the sense that you need grace every single day? Do you want to be a better person? Do you have the need to journey with people? See, that need to journey with people, it's not going anywhere. Yes, certain forms will die because they're lame. But the need to journey with a group of people, we're always going to have that. And let's be honest. When it comes to this following Jesus stuff, from the very beginning, there has always been a bit of fear or a bit of unknowing or some uncertainty, right? So I want to look at Matthew chapter 28. It's the last chapter of Matthew's gospel. And I want to look at the last 5 verses, verses 16 through 20. But before we get there, let me give a little backstory on Matthew chapter 28. Jesus has just been crucified by the Roman Empire. Then they placed Jesus' body in the tomb. 2 women show up at the tomb, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. They show up at the tomb 3 days later, and they find that the tomb is empty. They're all freaked out by this, as they should be. And this angel of the Lord appears to them and says, look, you can see Jesus isn't here. He's actually gone ahead of you into Galilee. Go and tell his disciples to meet him in Galilee. He's gone ahead of them. So that's what they do. They go and talk to the disciples. Meanwhile, the higher-ups in the empire, the chief priest and other elders, they get together and say, look, this is not good. If the Roman governor finds out about this, if Pontius Pilate finds out about this, he is going to be angry and someone is going to have to pay for this. So they come up with this plan and they come up with a bunch of money and they go to the soldiers and they bribe them with this money and they say, look, you have to say that you fell asleep while you were at the tomb, and when you did, some of the disciples came and stole the body. And verse 16, or verse 15, right before 16, that story ends like this. And this story is still told among the Jews to this day. Now, you're a disciple, and they tell you to go meet Jesus, who you just witnessed his death, his crucifixion. Go meet this guy in Galilee. You think you might have some fear? You think you might have some confusion? Some major doubts? Some big questions? Here's where the story picks up. The last 5 verses of Matthew's Gospel. Meanwhile, the 11 disciples were on their way to Galilee, headed for the mountain Jesus had set for their reunion. The moment they saw him, they worshiped him. Some, though, held back, not sure about worship, about risking themselves totally. How cool is that verse right there? Some held back. Some were in doubt. Don't you just want to stop and say, wait a minute. The disciples were face to face with the living Christ, and they doubted. They had fear. Yeah, it's kind of cool, isn't it? Like in the scriptures, doubt and faith are often synonymous. There's all kinds of hope for you and me. And here's how Jesus continues. I love his response. Jesus, undeterred, went right ahead and gave his charge. God authorized and commanded me to commission you. Go out and train everyone you meet, far and near in this way of life, marking them by baptism in the threefold name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Then instruct them in the practice of all I have commanded you. I'll be with you as you do this, day after day after day, right up to the end of the age. It's like Jesus tells them, look, you guys are a community. You're a tribe of people, but you're not just a tribe who exists for yourselves. You're a tribe that is actually going out into the world. Go to people who you've been leery of. Go to people that you don't know, people you're unsure of. Go to them, and when you go to them, don't make some program out of it. Go to them and simply love them. And like when it comes to all your religious rituals, good. Do these things. Baptism, baptize them. Let them come, because this is what it means to have a new identity. This is what it means to have a sense of belonging, a sense of community. I mean, can't you imagine Jesus saying to them, look, do not set up a bunch of rules and regulations about who can be baptized and who can't be baptized. Let them come. And when it comes to the table, don't set up a bunch of rules about who can partake and who can't partake. Let them come. Include them in community. And when you do this, you're a disciple. You're modeling the way I taught you to live. Keep doing this. Go be the community. Model the things I have shown you. You see, they were a new kind of community. They were in a new era, a new day. Something new was happening, and they had to figure out what it meant to be community in this new way. Communitas was happening. Something deeper was happening. And Jesus ends by saying, by the way, you're not going alone. In fact, I'm going to go with you. Day after day after day, I go with you. Sometimes it feels like we're that kind of new old community, doesn't it? We're in a new era. We're in a new day, a new religious landscape. And if you're like me, you know all kinds of people with serious doubts and big questions, and when it comes to organized religion, they want nothing to do with it. Or maybe even you come into this space here on Sunday morning, and you have big questions, big doubts. Maybe even wonder, why did you come here this morning? Because you know it's something kind of good to do, but you really question why you're here. Why are you part of this St. Luke's community? And if that's you, you're in good company. Good company. And aren't you so glad that Jesus didn't respond to the disciples like this? Well, what you guys need to do here, since you obviously have some doubts, is you need to go back home, you need to get your stuff together and figure out what you believe, and then maybe we can meet again next week and see that if you really believe deeply enough in me. Jesus wasn't an egomaniac. Jesus didn't make it all about him. He said, look, I realize you have significant doubts, fears, uncertainties, unknowns, but we've got a mission to do. We've got to go out and love the world. We've got to go to them. We've got to include them and create community. You see, rather than trying to do or trying to give the perception of something interesting happening, let's here at St. Luke's just keep doing something interesting. And in this culture, the most interesting thing we can do, the most faithful thing we can do, is to create and live out deep, meaningful, authentic community. And we do that together. We always do that together. And it is so easy to look around and say, man, have you seen him or her or them? It's like they've got it figured out. They're just gliding through life. Like especially if you're parents of young children and you look at other parents with young children. Honey, have you seen them? Like, have you seen their family photo? Like, their little daughter isn't sticking out their tongue all the time. They've like got it figured out. They are just gliding through life. Here's the secret. No, they're not. No one has it all figured out. No one is gliding through life. Everyone is just trying to figure it out. And the beauty of the whole thing is we'll always be figuring it out together. So I asked you all on Thursday on my Facebook page, I asked, where have you experienced like a meaningful experience with a group of people? So in other words, where's been the deepest, most meaningful places of community for you? You all said all kinds of things. Prayer groups, 12-step meetings, meetings with a group of friends that happens on an annual basis, Bible studies, all sorts of things, but you all also said the same thing. Like if you read the thread in the thread, the deepest community happens when you cry together, when you laugh together, when you struggle together, and when you celebrate together. And this happens to be really important, especially during times of tragedy. Someone on that post was describing her Columbine experience. And she said, it was amazing to see how we came together and how tragedy became strength. It's what makes support groups so powerful. AA groups, Al-Anon groups, people who have loved ones who deal with mental illness, people who have loved ones who are in prison. It's the place they can come and struggle together. They can celebrate milestones together. They can take off the mask together and be who they are. It's what's the beauty behind the 12 steps, because the 12 step reminds them that this community isn't just for you. It's not just so you're lifted up and not just for the people in that room, but the 12 step reminds them to take this message and then to go out into the world to other people who are suffering and struggling. Communitas. There may be some fear because we go to unknown places, and in the midst of fragmented stories and doubts and big questions, we do it together. We always do it together. And God is always with us, day after day after day. Communitas. It's the deepest, most meaningful, most authentic form of community. So I invite you to sing with us the song. We sang it last week. It's called Oceans. Going to the deep places, God going with us, finding God in the mystery.